I never believed in ghosts. Not really. Sure, I'd heard the stories everyone has, the old legends about haunted hotels, rooms where guests checked in but never checked out, whispers of footsteps in empty hallways and cold spots that lingered long after the heat was turned up. But I always chalked it up to overactive imaginations, the kind of tales people tell to make a boring night more interesting. That was before I spent a night in room 217 of the old Marrowbone Hotel, and before 3 a.m. became a time I'll never forget. It started as a joke, honestly. My friends and I had been on a road trip, the kind you take in your late 20s when you're trying to recapture a little of the freedom you felt in college. We'd stopped in a small town off the highway, the kind of place that looks like it hasn't changed in 50 years. The Marrowbone Hotel stood at the edge of Main Street, its brick facade faded, the neon sign buzzing weakly in the night. We'd heard about it from a bartender at the only open bar in town. If you're looking for a thrill, he'd said, spend a night in room 217. Locals say it's the most haunted room in the state. People don't last till morning. We laughed it off, but after a few drinks, the idea started to sound like fun. A dare, really. I was the one who took it. My friends booked a pair of safer, more ordinary rooms on the second floor, but I insisted on room 217. The desk clerk, a thin, nervous man with deep-set eyes, hesitated when I asked for it. "You sure?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "We don't usually rent that one out." I grinned, trying to look braver than I felt. "I'll be fine," I said. "It's just for one night." He handed me the key, an old-fashioned brass thing attached to a heavy fob. "If you need anything," he said, "just call the front desk, but don't open the door for anyone after midnight, no matter what you hear." I laughed, thinking he was just playing along with the legend, but his eyes were deadly serious. I shrugged it off, grabbed my bag, and headed up the creaking stairs. Room 217 was at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The carpet was threadbare, the wallpaper peeling in places. The door itself looked older than the rest, the number barely hanging on by a single screw. I unlocked it, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The room was cold, colder than the hallway, and smelled faintly of old smoke and something else, something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in a vase. I set my bag down and flicked on the light. The bulb overhead buzzed and flickered before settling into a weak yellow glow. The room was small, with a single bed pressed against the far wall, a battered dresser, and a window that looked out over the empty parking lot. Heavy curtains, limp and dusty, barely moving in the draft that seemed to seep from the cracks around the window frame. There was a faded armchair in the corner, its upholstery worn thin, and a small table with a cracked glass top. Everything about the place felt tired, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just the power of suggestion. I unpacked my things, plugged in my phone, and texted my friends down the hall. "Settled in. If I don't make it through the night, avenge my death." They replied with a string of laughing emojis and ghost gifs, and for a moment the tension eased. I turned on the TV, but all I could get was static and a faint warbling music that sounded like it was coming from another room. I turned it off and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the silence. It was only 11:30, but I was already starting to feel tired. Maybe it was the long drive, or maybe it was the weight of the stories pressing in on me. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the way the shadows seemed to move in the corners of the room. I closed my eyes, telling myself I'd laugh about this in the morning, that I'd have a great story to tell. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear a faint creak, or the distant sound of footsteps in the hallway, and my eyes would snap open. At midnight, my phone buzzed with a message from my friend Mark. "Still alive?" I replied with a thumbs up, but as I set the phone down, I remembered the desk clerk's warning. "Don't open the door for anyone after midnight." I laughed to myself, but the words stuck with me, echoing in my mind. I checked the lock on the door, making sure it was secure, then crawled back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. The hotel was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every sound your own body makes. I could hear my heartbeat, the rush of blood in my ears, the soft hiss of my breath. I tried to focus on that, to let it lull me to sleep, but somewhere deep in the silence I thought I heard something else, a faint whisper so soft I couldn't make out the words. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe the pipes rattling in the walls. Old buildings make strange noises, and I'd stayed in enough cheap motels to know that every creak and groan can sound like a ghost if you let your imagination run wild. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I rolled over, pulling the covers tighter, and tried to force myself to sleep. But the whispering didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder, more insistent, like a conversation happening just out of earshot. I sat up, straining to listen. The sound seemed to be coming from the hallway just outside my door. I checked my phone. 12:47 a.m. I considered texting my friends, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. Instead, I got out of bed and tiptoed to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. The whispering was clearer now, a woman's voice, low and urgent, as if she was pleading with someone. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated, remembering the clerk's warning. "Don't open the door for anyone after midnight." I almost laughed at myself, standing there in the dark, heart pounding, afraid of a story. But the fear was real, a cold knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I backed away from the door and sat on the edge of the bed, listening as the whispering faded into silence. For a while, nothing happened. I lay back down, eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting the seconds. The room felt colder now, the air heavy and still. I pulled the blanket up over my head, trying to block out the world, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of movement in the darkness, shapes that didn't belong, faces that vanished when I tried to focus on them. Then, at exactly 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud, sharp knock at the door. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, echoing through the room. I sat up, heart racing, every muscle in my body tense. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a voice, a woman's voice, the same one I'd heard whispering in the hallway. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "Let me in. I need your help." I froze, every instinct screaming at me not to move. The voice sounded so real, so desperate, but there was something off about it, something that made my skin crawl. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, as the voice called out again, pleading, begging. The doorknob rattled, and I watched in horror as the shadow of a hand passed beneath the crack of the door. I couldn't look away. The shadow lingered, fingers splayed wide, impossibly long and thin. The woman's voice grew more frantic, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush. "Please, I'm hurt, I can't breathe, please open the door." Her voice was muffled, as if she were speaking through a mouthful of water, and every syllable sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to help, wanted to believe it was just a lost guest or a prank, but something deep inside me knew better. The air in the room felt charged, heavy with a pressure that made it hard to breathe. I slid off the bed and crouched behind the dresser, my eyes fixed on the door. My phone was still on the nightstand, just out of reach, but I didn't dare move. The knocking stopped, replaced by a scraping sound like fingernails dragging across the wood. The shadow under the door shifted, stretching and twisting in ways that didn't seem possible. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it all to go away, but the sounds only grew louder, more insistent. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. The pressure in the room lifted, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I waited, counting the seconds, afraid to move. When I finally opened my eyes, the shadow was gone. The only sound was the faint hum of the old radiator in the corner. I crawled back onto the bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, and stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I lost track of time. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember is waking to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, moving past my door and down toward the stairs. I listened, heart pounding, as the footsteps faded into the distance. I wanted to believe it was just another guest, maybe one of my friends coming back from the vending machine, but I knew they were both asleep in their rooms. I could feel it, the same way you can feel a storm coming in the air. I lay there, wide awake, until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains. The room felt different in the daylight, less threatening, almost normal. I got up, legs shaky, and checked the door. The lock was still engaged, the chain still in place. But when I looked down, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A single wet handprint smeared across the bottom of the door, as if someone or something had tried to claw its way inside. I stared at the handprint, unable to move. The shape was unmistakable, but it was wrong, too narrow. The fingers too long, the palm oddly twisted. It glistened in the morning light, as if whatever had left it was still damp, still clinging to the world just outside my door. My mind raced, searching for an explanation. Maybe it was a prank, I told myself. Maybe someone had dipped their hand in water and tried to scare me, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The fear I'd felt in the night was too real, too raw to be the work of a bored hotel guest. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture, needing proof that I hadn't imagined it. My hands were shaking so badly the image came out blurry, but the handprint was there, undeniable. I texted my friends, telling them to come to my room right away. Mark and Jess arrived a few minutes later, both looking groggy and annoyed. But when I showed them the handprint, their expressions changed. Mark knelt down, touching the door with his fingertips. "It's cold," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "like ice." Jess looked at me, her face pale. "Did you open the door?" she asked. I shook my head, unable to speak. We stood there in silence, the three of us staring at the mark on the door. Finally, Mark broke the tension. "Let's get out of here," he said. We packed our things in record time, barely speaking as we checked out. The desk clerk didn't say a word as we handed over the keys, but his eyes lingered on me, dark and knowing. We drove out of town in silence, the hotel shrinking in the rearview mirror until it disappeared into the morning mist. None of us spoke about what had happened. Not really. We tried to laugh it off, to make jokes about haunted hotels and overactive imaginations, but the fear lingered, a shadow that followed us long after we left Marrowbone behind. That night, as I lay in my own bed, safe in my own home, I tried to convince myself it was over. But at 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of 3 slow knocks on my bedroom door. I froze, heart pounding, every muscle in my body tense. The knocks came again, louder this time, echoing through the darkness. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I just lay there, eyes wide open, waiting for the dawn. The hours crawled by, each minute stretching into eternity as I lay there, paralyzed by fear. I kept my eyes fixed on the door, watching for any sign of movement, any flicker of a shadow beneath the frame. The house was silent, but my mind was a storm. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind outside made me flinch. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that the events of the night before had followed me home in my thoughts, not in reality. But the memory of that cold, wet handprint, the desperate voice in the hallway, refused to fade. When the first light of morning finally crept through the curtains, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I got up, moving slowly, every muscle stiff with tension. I checked the door. No marks, no sign that anything had been there. I walked through the house, checking every window, every lock, searching for some rational explanation. But everything was as it should be. The only thing out of place was me, haunted by something I couldn't explain. I tried to go about my day as usual, but the sense of unease lingered. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that handprint, heard that voice. I jumped at every unexpected sound, found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a shadow where there shouldn't be one. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I just needed sleep, that it would all fade with time. But that night, as the clock crept toward 3, the fear returned, sharp and insistent. I haven't stayed in a hotel since that night. I avoid old buildings, long hallways, and especially closed doors after midnight. My friends and I don't talk about what happened in room 217. We pretend it was just a story, a bad dream, something that happened to someone else. But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake to the sound of knocking, 3 slow, deliberate knocks that echo through the darkness. And I remember the desk clerk's warning. Don't open the door for anyone after midnight, no matter what you hear, because some doors, once opened, can never be closed again.